Time, as we explore our first book, which by the way is called The Book Thief, I will give you a lot of context. And what do I mean by that? What's the background? What's the setting? We're going to discuss the characters. And a lot of these books are, well, they're young adult books. So our first one is what would be classified in the genre of historical fiction. In other words, it's fiction. It's a made up story, made up characters. But it's one of my favorite all-time books, I have to tell you. Hey, Annie. And I'm just talking about what our course is going to be like and everything and what we'll be doing and everything else. And I'll tell you a little these stories. I want them to be fun and memorable. So when you get your homework, don't worry about answering 25 comprehension questions and 25 vocabulary words for each chapter, okay? It's not going to be like that. We're going to look into themes. We're going to relate it to real life events, even though it's fiction, okay? And our first one is historical fiction. So it happened in a time that really happened, and probably one of the most darkest moments in human history. Moments, it was more than a moment. But it was during the Nazis. Okay, World War II. It's not a World War II bang, tanks, flamethrowers, people blowing up kind of book, although there's a little bit of that. Little bit of that. It's about young people, your age, that would be growing up. And you know, guys, I used to teach history, and I always used to tell my students in high school, it's an uncomfortable notion that if most of us had been growing up in Nazi Germany and subject to their school systems and everything else, we probably would have ended up being Nazis. Not frothing true believers, in the Fuhrer, but, most people go along to get along. And this is about surviving under awful circumstances in a very awful time. Okay. Now, so we'll be looking at a bit of that setting. But before we do, like I said, I used to be a teacher, used to be all kinds of things. Used to be. I'm retired now. You could look behind me, you can see all those cool goalie masks. I make those. And I also used to be a goalie back in the day. And so now I like to do this. And when we talk about the books we'll be looking at, we'll be having protagonists and all that. Before we do that, I want to show you our classroom. I don't know if any of you have visited it yet or had time to. It just got set up, I believe, today. So this is our classroom. We'll be communicating through here, any little assignments and whatnot. And these are the books we'll be looking at: The Book Thief, Hunger Games, Holes, Kill a Mockingbird, another classic, and Life of Pi. Okay, so each one, and we'll do them in this order, and we'll see here that you'll get about 5 classes per book. Some are a bit longer than others, and we'll be able to cruise through these. So basically your homework will be keeping up with the reading. Okay, now, as we read, we'll be doing a bit of reading in class, of course, when we get a chance. We'll be doing a lot of discussion and whatnot. Now, one thing I want to bring to your attention, how many of you ever read or listen to audiobooks? Okay, good. Some of us, I, for one, many years of teaching, I found it's not a bad tool to be listening to you can get all these books on audiobook and the internet for free, and to read along so the information is going in your eyes and in your ears at the same time. It's an awesome way to get it. Now, Because one of the things that'll happen as we read in class, our sections, you'll see that I'll be interrupting a lot and blah, 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 talking about this character and that character and this guy and that guy and all these things. And I show little videos and I do all kinds of little, like I said, supplemental learning around the edges of the book. So it's not a traditional class where you'll be learning the book and you have to answer these 5 questions. And oh, by the way, at the end of the week, you'll get a little quiz on it. You know, what character said this? Oh, no. We want you to get the big picture, the ideas. What is a central theme? Now, I will do some spoiler alerts. I try not to, but I always give stuff away anyway. Our first book, which is called The Book Thief, and I told you a little bit about it, setting in Nazi Germany during World War II. And one thing about this story, and like I said before, some of you came in, this is one of my favorite stories. I read a lot. I've read a lot. I'm a writer too, so I write a lot. But this is one of my favorites, not only to teach, but just to read over and over again, because the narrator, I love the narrator. The narrator is funny, sarcastic, little bit of a bummer. Narrator is not a person. It's not a dog. It's not a sea monster. It's not an alien. The narrator is death. Okay. You've all seen Death. The Grim Reaper, you know, the guy with the hood and the big cycle creeps up behind you at the moment of deaths and takes your soul away, guides you to the other world. That's who our narrator is. Now, as you can imagine, if your job is death, to guide human souls off the earth at the end of their life, during a war, you'd be overworked and very busy, right? There's a lot of that. So he's kind of cranky at times because he's working too hard, but he is a perfect narrator. And because he knows everything, he knows what's going to happen to everybody and when he's going to come and see you. And he gets a little upset sometimes when, have you ever heard the expression, people cheat death? You know, 3 people are standing there and the 2 people, one guy on the left gets shot, one guy on the right gets shot in the war, and you're standing in the middle and you didn't. You cheated death. So there's a lot of that goes on in our story as well. The other thing is, I probably won't have you reading out loud in class. Okay, because I know some people don't like to read out loud in class. And that's why I like using the audiobook as well as we read along. And it's easier to pause and point things out.
Amongst yourselves.
And that's all. As you can see, it's a pretty simple little introduction, doesn't give anything away. But it wets our lips and gets us, it's a little appetizer as to what our story, what we can expect from it. Now, on your web page, just let me share that for a second. And I want to bring up one more thing, or on your classroom. And you'll see I left this up here for us. Make sure I'm sharing. Good. There's our author, Markus Zusak. He's Australian, by the way. And of course, he grew up hearing stories like we all do of the Nazi Germany and the bombing of Munich, the Jews being marched through his mother's small German town when he grew up, because even though he grew up in Australia, he heard the stories of it. And there's, of course, Germany in the middle, not the greatest picture, but get to that later. At age 30, Zusak has already asserted himself as one of the most innovative, poetic or novelist. Now, poetic novelist means he writes and it's like poetry. We're going to talk a little bit about his style. Very lyrical, very imaginative, beautifully written. We call it classic syntax. Now, Zuzak won all kinds of awards. And these are some of his other books. If you are interested in perhaps reading more of his works after we're done this one, I'm going to introduce you into different writers and different writing styles, different eras and whatnot as well. We know that the book Thief is narrated by Death, who finds a story as he walks through Munich after it's been bombed. Get to the bombing. Death is a unique narrator, of course. Mostly Death and war as best friends working hand in hand, but it's not the case in this novel. Not happy. He's not happy about his work. Death sees war as the boss who asks the impossible, making him work to the brink of exhaustion. Like I said, he's getting tired. The Holocaust, all the bombings and the battles and everything. Our main character is Liesel Memminger, and she's the book thief. She's a foster child growing up in Munich, and we'll get to her circumstances as we get into the novel. She steals her first book, which is called The Grave Digger's Handbook, at a grave site of her brother. Okay. And it is actually that, a grave digger. Stories about, now our story is basically about, if you want to look at the major theme of our story, is the power of words. Now, wait, I have to write something here. Hitler stage. Whether they're written words or spoken words. Now, I know some of you know a little bit about history and Nazi Germany and World War II and all that madness. And one of the things that we ask ourselves here in the 21st century is, how did people like follow that guy? What was it about him that made people actually believe the stuff he was saying? All the racist ideology and whatnot. Well, that's a good question. And one of it is the power of words, how he presented. And we'll be looking into that in a few classes as we get into our story as well. But the propaganda and the way the Nazis spread the message was very powerful at the time, using technology and whatnot. Now, of course, we find this out. Hitler uses words to assert power and wreak havoc. Well, Liesel uses words to cope with her difficult life. Colors are a big motif in Death's narrative. He associates colors with the souls he collects. He associates colors throughout the books as a means of expressing the scenes and creating a mood and atmosphere. And colors are a means for escape from the horror of death, as well as the confirmation. Death as a theme as well. Throughout the novel, the discussion of dying becomes a forefront. Very apparent theme during a war, of course. And World War II is also in the background, which, of course, is awful. And we'll get to the rest. Now, literature and words. Lisa learns the value of having a voice and knowing how to read. She also realizes that words are what hold the country under the power of Hitler and the Nazi party. Hitler's words, euphemisms, big words like that. We'll get to all of that too, the language of the Nazis. Hans is another important character. We'll get to meet him, and he teaches Liesel to read at night. And we will see a little bit more of that in I don't want to give any more away. I think that's the end of our show. Yes. So brief presentation, and that little presentation is up on our classroom page. And we're going to be jumping right into our story here. Okay. Now, a little bit more background. This was made into a movie. Okay. And we will be watching a few clips now and again of our characters and whatnot. Now, just to set it up, our story is about Lisa. Lisa. She's a young girl and she's basically orphaned. Okay. Doesn't know her mother. So she lives with a foster family who are they're not wealthy. They're not wealthy at all. And that's the household of Hans Huberman. Okay. And he takes in this poor orphan child, which was often a case, of course, because there was a lot during the war, right? Now, if you think of it, World War, the years 1939 to 1945, 39, 40, 41. If you were a betting man, you would say, or woman, sorry, you would say, hey, I'm going to bet on the Nazis. They're going to win this thing. They're kicking everyone's butt all along the way. But then 1941, Operation Barbarossa, going into Russia. Ooh, things started to change. That's when our story gets really hot and heavy. That's when the Allies are able to drop bombs on German cities, or start to. And that's what we're going to be seeing in our story as well. So, any questions or comments at this point? No? All right.
No questions.
All right. So we're going to get into this a little bit, into our book Thief. And one other thing before we get going. One of the most powerful images we have of the Nazis in World War II and within Germany is something that is probably one of the most disturbing aspects of World War II, and that is the book burnings. Students actually burned books that weren't very German or were considered anti-German or anti-Nazi, we could say, not German. Jack London, Remarque, All Quiet on the Western Front, all great works of literature, all considered anti-Nazi. Yes, Samuel. Oh, I can't hear you. Hello? Still can't hear you for some reason. Your mic's off or on. Maybe you can type it in chat, your question. Okay. Anyway, never mind. Okay, yeah. So in Nazi Germany, they would actually have organized right across the country book burnings at schools.